Hi everyone, I'm super excited to host Jake Rudin, co-founder of Out of Architecture. Thanks a lot for being on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for letting me take a call from beautiful Portland, Oregon. So it's a very rare sunny day. And so, of course, I'm, having a casual call with a friend in my backyard. It feels like it couldn't be a better setting for a podcast.
I had the pleasure of meeting Jake recently at AIA. He organized an amazing event with great set of people. So we want to know, like, right from Bachelor of Architecture at Cornell to starting out of architecture, like, what would be your career highlights?
Yeah, there have been a lot of highlights and a lot of lowlights, including being threatened to be sued by a very famous architect. But we'll get there at some point. The highlights for sure. I mean, I loved my academic education. I came up in, traditional architectural bachelor's of architecture, as you mentioned, at Cornell, which that 5-year program was exceptional. And I felt like just was this incredible eye-opening experience that taught me to see the world differently. And that was, to me, the power of architecture and design. It's this incredible thing. But I tested these, sets of skills in all of these different size firms. I worked at really big firm, this multinational firm, big office here in Portland, Oregon. I worked internationally at a firm in Italy that's quite well renowned called Massimiliano Fuchs. I've worked at, a sort of government aviation focused firm in the South in Nashville where I grew up. And I just didn't find that same flavor in any of these firms. I was really shocked actually, because I loved model making. I had the chance to work in a great model shop. It didn't really feel the same. I loved 3D. I had the chance to go work on some projects in 3D, and that really felt very tempered. And so, I had this great idea that, well, instead of going into architecture, I'm going to stay in academia, and that's a safe bet. And of course, anyone in academia knows what an absolute, mess it is to lead a professional life in academia. But I went for my master's in design technology at the GSD, and that really opened my eyes to where these skills could be utilized that weren't traditional architectural practice. And so I was doing projects with wearables in eye tracking. I was doing projects related to food in the city of Bergamo in Italy. I was doing projects that involved Unity and game design and digital fabrication and robotics and 3D printing and all of these things. And I was seeing professors and, instructors come through who had these very strange titles. They were like head of design at Apple Music, or, they were running their own product design firm that was supporting LG in developing the newest and latest remotes. And it was really weird. I was thinking, how are these architects doing these like totally different roles? It's kind of an odd thing. They must be these anomalies that like have never existed before and will never exist again. But I went through and interviewed at a bunch of architecture firms, thinking I was still going to go into traditional practice. I was assuming like I'd work my way up to principal and start my own firm, and in parallel I'd be teaching and I'd become the dean of a university program and all this stuff. I had grand ambitions. And as I was doing these interviews, one really stood out above the rest. And actually, this is very funny because at the event that you and I attended at AIA, at the sort of larger tech event, I ran into the person who was in this interview. And she had told me over a decade ago that the job that I was looking for did not exist in architecture. I showed up with my portfolio of VR work and 3D modeling and all these things. And she just said, look, we're looking for a BIM manager. And that was sort of the key to me that I needed to leave. It was both made very explicit, and also it was very frustrating because I still, to this day, I would do my academic degrees again. I spent a lot of time and money, getting my architectural training, and I feel like it was the best education you could possibly ask for. It was the most varied, the most exceptional, and I see, very similar paths for landscape architects, great engineers, great interior architects, etc. But I think architect stands above them all in terms of the rigor of the programs, the variety, etc. So I went to work for a startup. I spent a couple of years there. It was an education technology startup, and I was the director of business development, which meant nothing to me when I accepted the title, and I came to find was very much, utilize the skills of presentation, of client and stakeholder management. It took a lot of my creative problem solving and channeled it into feedback around a specific product. It was a virtual product. And then I moved across the country as that endeavor wound down. The founder was not super keen on opening up the technology or sharing. And so it closed a lot of doors for us in that world. And I ended up applying again to architecture firms and all of these other places when I was moving to Portland. But Portland is the home of Nike. And because Nike was born here, there are offices for Adidas and Under Armour and Lululemon and Arc'teryx and North Face, and Columbia is based here, and Keen has offices. So it's this kind of sportswear mecca. And I applied to all of these different positions and ended up having this interview with Adidas for a role that bridged the gap between innovation work, so really pure theoretical design, and inline work, this delivery of finalized product. And at the end of this interview, I used my architecture portfolio. I showed my structures model from third year. It's like casting with plaster and silicone. I showed my 3D modeling work. I showed my game design work. They said, wow, this is like really kind of exceptional variety of skills. Like you know how to do mold making? I said, yeah, I feel I've done that. They said, wow, you know how to do 3D modeling? I said, yeah. They said, well, what do you know about, thermomechanics? And I said, nothing, but I would love to learn. And they offered me the job on the spot. And I think that is really telling because it was one of these moments where I was able to be very truthful about the superpower of architects, which is to learn and digest new things so quickly, not necessarily to be the foremost expert, but to be able to synthesize fuzzy things and make them clear. And so I led a lot of my career, almost 9 years at Adidas doing that. And in parallel, I built this thing that we're talking about today, which is called Out of Architecture, and did that with my best friend, Aaron Pellegrino, who was, we've been friends since the first year of architecture school together. And we had so many people come to us. She has her own path out of traditional practice. She runs a design build firm. She's a licensed architect, and she teaches professional practice at a number of universities. And we've both had so many people ask us how to do something different that we ended up having to both kind of to protect our time and also to really dedicate, focus to it, turn that into a business. And so we've been coaching and advising individuals for the last 8 years on how to do other things, how to pursue other pathways outside of traditional practice. And that business has also born a sort of, secondary business, which is helping primarily architecturally adjacent companies, really even AEC tech companies, to hire amazing talent out of the pool of 12,000 candidates, that we've coached over the years. And then, of course, we have this really amazing and lovely community of, somewhere on the order of almost 70,000 people who support and believe in kind of the message of that we promote, which is, on one hand, getting out of architecture, if that's what you need, but is more so, I think, and more appropriately, what you get out of architecture, what you bring with you and what you carry with you into the world, and making sure that, you see value in the form that energizes and fulfills you. And so that's my career trajectory. I do this full time now, so I have the amazing benefit of, I guess, being my own boss, although I'm also kind of a shitty boss sometimes. So it's a mix, but no one to blame but me. So it's a real honor to get to engage with people on that level every day.
You have such an incredible journey. I'm curious, when you were transitioning from that startup to applying for roles at Nike and other firms, was there any point in this phase you had like self-doubt?
My God, all the time. Yeah, I mean, I'm cursed and blessed with an overabundance of confidence. I mean, I come from every point of privilege that you could possibly list. So I'm extremely lucky in that realm, right? Like, I'm a white, cisgendered male who, grew up in a middle-class family, was fortunate enough to go to 2 Ivy League universities. Like, I am not shy of confidence or people telling me that, like, I can do something. So I recognize that that is not something to, to look at and just say that this is because of my own talent or specialness. But I did have a lot of trouble giving up kind of this idea of becoming an architect. Like, I interviewed at firms here in Portland after having done 2 years outside of traditional practice already. And I did that because it just felt like I was losing so much. Like there was this huge sunk cost fallacy that I was going to be giving up, decades and decades of a career that I had worked so hard to try and achieve. I had all my licensure hours to become a licensed architect, and I just never ended up taking the exams. And, there were also these moments too where, thankfully I had received a couple of offers from architecture firms, so I understood what a kind of baseline would be for me. And those offers were $42,000 and $46,000. And my tuition at Cornell and GSD every year was more expensive than that salary. And I could not believe that, coming from like what were lauded as the two number one universities for this, that like these were the things being put in front of me. It was a real challenge. And yet, Adidas showed up at that moment. And of course, I'd been applying to other things, and salary transparency was sort of coming to the forefront at the time. So it was maybe slightly more common to see salaries posted, but I knew $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 was not this unattainable sum out there. I had a lot of fun near misses in that application process. One of the stories that I love telling the most is, I walked out of this second interview with a startup that was based here in Portland, and I came home to my wife and I said, this feels really good. Like, Ja Rule is an investor. There's going to be a big party in the Bahamas. They're working on this great music app. And of course, the company is sort of infamous. It's this company called Fire, and they had many documentaries made about the Fire Festival, which was this absolute nightmare. And I never heard back from them because this was February, 2 months before this infamous, like, horrible party thing that had happened. And so I'm glad that I didn't do that. But I interviewed with them for a product manager role on digital products. And, and it was interesting because I would get into these situations where they would be asking me, like, have you shipped software and things like that? And I had to, of course, be transparent. And so a lot of this doubt was coming from, how am I supposed to make this jump if I've never done any of these things before? And I really had to teach myself how to describe what an architecturally trained individual is capable of without using industry terminology. And that was, I think, is at the foundation of what we do with coaching clients, is a lot of this narrative reframing, storytelling, helping people to understand what a potential path looks like and how they can use their existing skills to achieve that if that's the direction they want to move in. It was a difficult transition, but, of course, as with a lot of things in my life, I was very lucky to be granted the opportunity, probably because of, I have very strong resume. I had the opportunity to like reframe a lot of the work that I had done. I had this somewhat technical degree that I could position less as an architecture degree and much more as design technologies. So, in the narrative, I think I was able to create what, for the hiring manager, felt like an obvious fit for me at Adidas. And he's still a good friend to this day. I think that, that opportunity and getting that chance was really pivotal in shaping the rest of my career.
I want to pick your brain on like people who are, let's say, currently in architecture and they want to transition into tech roles, maybe in construction tech startups. What's a big mindset shift and visualization exercise you would recommend?
So just to clarify, so this is going from architecture into tech, some version of tech, right? One of the biggest thought exercises and things that I take clients through is when we frame that transition out, everybody thinks, I have to learn how to code. Just every single person, they're like, well, I don't code. I don't use, maybe they don't even use Figma, right? And they just feel like, I can't go into product design. I can't go into product management. I'm not going to be a software or full stack engineer. I don't know AI, ML, and they eliminate that whole side of, that whole industry, but particularly in AEC, this kind of AEC tech realm, just because of that. And I have to express to people, like, of course, in tech, a lot of the times, we do have hard tech where the product is something physical, like, a structurally insulated panel or, some other kind of material or robotic offering. But let's talk about tech as software. People think software is it. That's all that happens. That's the product. Once the product is done, people find it and buy it. That's it. But they don't take into account all of the work that happens around customer success, around adoption, around go-to-market strategy, around communications. And that work is actually where architects often are like the most valuable. And especially in AEC tech, you and I spent some time together, and at the AIA conference, there was a massive expo, and a lot of the expo, booths surround these tools and software and services that are being developed to make architects' lives and jobs easier or more efficient. Who better to teach architects how to use these tools than other architects? Who better to help translate their needs into feedback for the software team to develop than other architects? There are all of these pathways into tech that are not just on the software side. That said, there are also a really nice blend of those roles. I very often have people who do feel a little bit more techy, like myself. Like, I am a computational designer, but I'm not a software engineer. I know enough to write some C# and some JavaScript and get myself into trouble and, feel, of course, like very proud anytime Claude and I can ship something together. But it's not legitimate software engineering in the same way, right? You can speak that language. Those bridge roles exist as well, and not just computational designers who make 3D geometry, but also people who can act kind of as a design engineer or a design advocate who can help to build and shape these systems, or even who know the workflows that are going to be supplanted, going to be replaced well enough to help design the replacement. I mean, a lot of people's jobs over the years have been to replace themselves. And I think that's an unfortunate thing when we look at AI and people think like, well, if I design this system, then, it's going to put every computational designer out of a job. And of course, that's never the case. And yet, one of the things that keeps people relevant is when you think about the transition from traditional bookkeeping to like modern spreadsheets, the people who were able to help build the most efficient, the most beautiful accounting systems were the accountants. And now they become the expert users. They help other people to translate those things. Like, everyone thought, oh my God, every bookkeeper, every accountant's going to be out of a job. And of course, that's not the case. We have all those people today. I pay a CPA, I pay a bookkeeper to do all this work. Even with all of these automated tools, it just makes them more efficient and makes the end result, better and able to be used in other formats. So I think when we think about design as not this like sacred, untouchable process, the goal is always to create more time for the real value of architects and designers, which is the thought, the intelligence, the learned, intellect that goes into the built environment. And I would encourage people to think about a transition to tech in the same way. It's like you can still have an impact on the industry from outside of it. It was one of the things that I was told leaving. You'll never be able to, change the architectural profession or improve it if you leave, which is ironic because I think I have a much larger platform, a much broader sweeping change over the industry and helping individuals than I ever would have from inside a single firm.
I see. How can one listening who is interested to collaborate with you at out of architecture? What are different ways one can work together?
That's a good question. So for someone who feel like they need support, that could be support building their own individual business. That could be support transitioning from architecture to something else. That could be support in the career search, having already made the jump. We have a lot of ways that we work with clients, but the primary one is we have this whole coaching side of the business. And I always encourage people just to come and book an intro call with us. They're relatively low cost thing that we pack with advice and we tailor specifically to whatever it is that you're looking for. And these are very personal circumstances. People prioritize different things, whether that's salary or making a move with a spouse or, trying to find something that is more leaning in one direction, creative, monetarily fulfilling, etc. And those are easy conversations to have. And we've done so many of them. And I feel really humbled and honored to have gotten to listen to so many people's stories and to give them sometimes unsolicited advice on major life decisions. But we also have a online community. We have a product effectively called The Collective. And in there is, over 150 different architects and individuals. A lot of these people are also mentors who have made this transition, who have put their hand up and said they would love to chat with people who are considering that pathway. So I think those are some great resources. We also have our own podcast. If you're as as I'm guessing a podcast fan listening to this. It's called Tangents by Out of Architecture. And it is the narratives of so many of those mentors and just the same questions you asked me, right? Like, how did you make this transition? What was the experience? What skills did you lean on? What would you recommend to other people? And I think that's a great free resource for people to engage with and listen to. On the other side, I'm hoping that there are some AEC tech founders out there listening to this who are itching to hire great talent. And of course, as we have been for the last couple of years, we're getting to work with right now about 15 different tech startups to help bring in amazing talent. And we do that as a sort of full service recruiting business. And I think the best thing about that, it's funny because people often ask me, "Oh, so you're a recruiter?" And it's like, yeah, but I hate being framed that way. I think what I like about what I do is I get to do this matchmaking, and I get to do it from a very ethical, very moral standpoint where I pick great clients. I pick roles that I know will be of benefit to people in the community. So we do decline roles that are underpaid. We decline roles that are in too much of a traditional framework. So we don't recruit for just like any old architecture firm, et cetera. And we really try to, make sure that our community and our people get and see these opportunities. So it's this great partnership to like fulfill the mission on one side of the business and support companies who we also believe in the work that they're doing.
How can we support in your mission?
Yeah, I mean, we have all of our socials. My favorite, of course, is LinkedIn, which is just terrible. Everybody hates it, but I love it. I'm sort of a sadistic, LinkedIn first person. So come, connect, engage, and I think this conversation, Meyer, is a great way to support. I mean, I love having these discussions. We've, spoken at schools. We did a big webinar last week for the ACSA and for educators in architectural schools, which was incredible opportunity to get to like talk about what it means to educate the next generation of architecturally trained individuals. So I'm always open to an opportunity, and our contact form's open on the website. Aaron and I respond to everything. We're just, it's been kind of a very personal business from day one. So always happy just to hear from people who resonate with the mission.
What would be your piece of advice for running a business in AEC? Like any tips you can share on business model, service
Sure.
acquisition?
Yeah. I mean, I love talking about that stuff, and I'm very transparent. And, we, on the recruiting spectrum, for example, we charge a relatively high fee in the AEC space. We charge a relatively low fee for the tech world, and that ranges anywhere from, let's say like 15, 18% all the way up through, 33%. And for those who aren't familiar with recruiting, very often, recruiters primarily charge the company based on successful placement, and they charge based on a percentage of the salary. And what I've found is, winning and building business in AEC is extremely challenging because the bar is so low. The bar is so low, Meyer, for everyone. And this is for architects when work with design clients. This is for companies that want to sell software to architects. This is like everything in this space is so undervalued. And the best way to run a business in this space is to have very specific, firm bounds of what make you successful so that you can commit fully to the work. And I find that, just the other day, someone came and they said, "Hey, we need you to drop your fee by 7%, like almost a total of 30% reduction of the fee that we would be charging." And I told them, I said, "Look, that one doesn't work because luckily I've built this brand based on standing up for your value. So I have to do the same thing. I have to
Yes.
do that. Otherwise, I'm just an utter hypocrite. This is a very clever hack. If you want to you start a brand that says, talking about value, and then you just get to use that as an argument in every conversation." But in reality, what I told them was like, we're not going to do our best work together if we go down that rabbit hole. You're asking me for a lower fee, so what you're expecting is either that it's going to be easier for me, I'm going to spend less time on it, or something to the effect that I'll be able to justify this. And I won't. I don't do worse work for clients. I do one level of quality. and I have a very specific focus. And the reason we're talking is because you're looking for something that really only I can offer. That's not to say that like I'm the only recruiter or I'm the only person who has access to this talent, but I work with candidates who not only have incredible skills, but who are good people. Like we have a no asshole policy in our business. We turn down work from both companies and individuals who are not pleasant, who don't, you know, who don't participate in the way that we feel like, is commensurate with doing good business. And so I don't have to worry about positioning that my clients are going to be well vetted. I know that I've met with all of them. I've spoken to 12,000 people, like every candidate I speak to up front, and I make sure that there's an alignment of like goals, of mission, of all these things. And if that's not the case, because I'm not taking a low fee, I don't have to force these people through the process. I can take my time, I can find the right fit, I can engage with this in the same way that a designer wants to engage with a built environment project. They want the outcome to be as good as possible. They don't want it to be moderated just because somebody wants to save a few bucks, right? And I think that builds this frustration. So I encourage business owners in this space to set a fee that may seem above average, but to make sure that you back that with your unique value and positioning. And that, I've so far, knock on wood, managed to make quite a successful transition from paying myself from a company and doing a side project into a business that sustains itself without excess. This is not like a gluttonous multi-million-dollar business. We about break even on coaching, and on the recruiting side, we use that to sustain effectively our salaries. And I think it works out really well. I enjoy the work that I do, and the clients who get it are the best clients. They get it, they appreciate it, they see what you're doing. They come back for more because you do great work for them. It's a much better cycle than doing hard fought, low paid work and suffering and having too much on your plate because you had to take on 5 other jobs. So that's my bit of advice. Easier said than done. I totally understand that, but it really is. It's absolutely true.
I feel we need like a negotiation masterclass from Jake. This was very good.
I do salary negotiation for clients, so come find me if that's of interest to you.
Yes. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up with a rapid fire where you have less than 5 seconds to answer, and you have to keep
Oh
it
my
super
gosh.
brief.
Okay, I'm
Okay.
terrible at these. Let's go.
Your favorite restaurant?
It's called Pacific Breeze. It's a Thai Vietnamese place down the road that I just love.
Any book which made a big impact in your life?
Writing the Out of Architecture book, and Ender's Game, which was just a phenomenal love of mine since I was a child. Architecturally, I would say The Architecture of Happiness. So those 3.
Any city or country which is in your travel bucket list?
Portugal and I think Scandinavia right now are both on my list, but I'm fortunate to have a travel list of something like 50 odd countries. So the bucket list gets a little shorter every year.
3 words your co-founder would describe you as.
Talkative, humorous, and genuine.
Your role model?
We're very close to Father's Day, and I have a really good relationship with my dad, and he is absolutely a role model to me. So I'll put him up for a role model of the year.
One piece of advice to your 18-year-old self.
Open every door, enjoy the ride. Don't be stressed about finding, what's going to make you happy for the next 20 or 30 years. Find what's going to be the best next year or two. Take it one step at a time.
If you get a magic wand and you can do one big change in the industry, what would that be?
I'd increase pay and fees. I think it would make people feel valued and more satisfied. It's not the only magic wand. The opposite version is to reduce the workload and give people more freedom and time. But I would love to see the value of architectural skills and education honored with pay that we see in other industries for far less training and investment.
Anything which we didn't cover in this interview and you would like to end on that closing note?
No, this was a fantastic conversation, and I would only take this opportunity to recall what I said at the very beginning, which is, if architecture is truly the thing that makes you happy as it is lived in traditional practice or in the context that you work. That brings me so much joy. I am not here to convince people to leave, and there are myriad number of problems with the profession, of course, but my goal is to create visibility and an understanding of what else architects and architectural designers are capable of, and to also equally celebrate those who choose to change the world through another lens. Aaron often says, we came into this believing that architecture could change the world, and neither of us really thinks that's the case anymore, but we do believe that architects have the power to change the world, and they can do that through so many different lenses. And that's what gets me up every day and on to 15 to 30-minute calls back to back with great people. So
It's amazing. It was pleasure hosting you.
thank you so much for the invitation, Meyer. It's been a long time coming, and I'm really glad to get to be on the podcast.